Imagine if you told someone that you were an accountant and that person immediately told you, "Oh, you're an accountant? My brother's girlfriend's cousin's neighbor is an accountant and a pretty good one. They've been successful with accounting. And let me tell you, I think you're probably doing it wrong. They're more successful than you'll ever be. And if you don't count your numbers this way, you'll never succeed as an accountant." No, that never happens. But if you're an author, you get this sort of a response pretty much all the time. When you're an author, you get so much unsolicited advice. And sometimes when someone's telling you that, they happen to know someone who's a super successful writer and that you should do things or talk to them or whatever, it's easy enough to rationalize and tell yourself, well, this person doesn't really know me. They don't really know what I'm doing, and they're not a writer, so I can just safely ignore that. However, what about the pieces of advice that are solicited? What about the advice that you get from other writers, or from beta readers, or from writing professionals, or from the internet when you look up questions about writing, or from writing coaches, articles about writing, books about writing, podcasts about writing, or a course that you're taking to be a better writer? What about if this solicited advice is actually more harmful than it is good? That's pretty frustrating to think that that might be true, but too many times I see that the most common writing advice is maybe a little bit wrong-headed. There are seeds of truth in each piece of writing advice that I've seen around, but sometimes if you take it too literally or if you follow it to the letter, it can end up hurting you rather than helping you in your writing career. So this episode of the How to Be an Author podcast isn't just going to be about breaking down a bunch of writing advice and telling you that it's all wrong, but it is going to be helping you to look at common writing advice and be able to determine whether it really is helpful in your situation, whether it's something that's actually going to move you forward rather than impeding your writing success. And just so that I'm not simply negative and that I'm a little bit more productive, I'm of course going to give you my version of that writing advice, my recommendations, things you should be looking at. And then I think I'm going to give you a few pieces of advice that will probably move you forward more than anything you've ever heard if you follow it. And it's not something that's to the letter, but it's just some important mindset and nitty-gritty stuff that too many people don't tell you when you're a writer. These are the things that you should be told, and you're not. So let's talk about the writing advice that's helpful, the writing advice that's not helpful, and then my biggest takeaway as a writing coach who's been on this journey just like you. I've been working my butt off. I made every mistake in the book. See what I did there? And I've been starting to slowly figure it out as I go. I've encountered more writing success than I really thought I would, but I'm also not where I want to be, just like you. I'm just maybe a little bit further down the road. So think of me as a mentor who's maybe 6 months down the road further than you, maybe a year further, but definitely everything I've done is attainable. And I give you the playbook to do this as a writing coach who's been there, done that, and who still is in the trenches right along with you. So let's get started on common pieces of writing advice you might not want to take. If you're a writer dreaming of becoming a successful author, join me, writing coach Karena Akhavein, on the How to Be an Author podcast, your weekly source for writing information, inspiration, and motivation. Hello, and welcome to the How to Be an Author podcast. I am your writing coach, Karena Akhavein. It's my pleasure to be helping writers just like you achieve their writing goals. And too many times, writers are focusing on one thing or another thing, and they don't realize that writing success is something that comes from a holistic practice where you enlist not just writing skills, but also mindset and business acumen. And I know that that sounds like it's a lot, and it can be. And that's why, as a writing coach, I've created programs that help authors step by step to achieve success, especially in courses like From Idea to Published in 6 Months, which not only helps you to finish your book and publish it, whether you want to do self-publishing or conventional publishing, but it also helps you with your mindset and with your author platform and marketing. These things are major. And I would say that too much writing advice doesn't take all of that into account. It's lots of moving parts. It is a hard thing to do. And the fact that it's so difficult and so enveloping means that you really need to take care of yourself and protect yourself against advice that could hurt. So how did I come up with my most common pieces of writing advice? I asked ChatGPT. Because I knew that ChatGPT could just give me that common writing advice without wrapping it in nuance, but that's the way that so many of us get the writing advice. So I thought it would be important to give it to you that way. So let's start with the most popular piece of writing advice. This is one that I hear all the time. This is one that when I'm checking up on various writing blogs or, things where authors are giving other authors advice. And this is a piece of advice that is everywhere. It is omnipresent. So it actually makes sense that this was number one on ChatGPT's list. And that piece of advice is get a consistent writing routine, write every day. Now, I actually think that this is really problematic for several reasons. I think that it's not always realistic to write every day. As an author who's published 4 books in the past year and a half, I would say that I'm pretty prolific, pretty productive writing and also balancing a writing coaching career and also my podcast, et cetera, plus, real life. I would say that writing every single day in my book is not actually realistic. Sometimes you're deep in the trenches of querying, or you're trying to do content for social media or for blogging. You're trying to promote your book. You're trying to establish a whole strategy for, advertising or whatever you want to do. But writing fiction is not really something that realistically can happen at that juncture. And I think that telling writers that if they don't write every day, they're not a real writer, that's not really constructive. So this whole write every day writing routine, if you don't have a writing routine every day, you're never going to make it. I think that that's really guilt-inducing and it's not super helpful. Now, I'm sure you're looking for the alternative. What do I think? I think that it's important to move forward on your writing career. I would say every day if possible. I think that it's important to have just measurable achievements where you're moving forward in your writing career in some way. Now, that could mean a whole bunch of different things. That could mean, of course, writing a scene, writing a chapter, writing a paragraph, but it can also mean writing a blog post or creating a social media posting calendar or corresponding with another writer or finding query agent, listings or finding beta readers or, trying to sign up for some kind of a writing conference or working on your cover. There's so many things that are not purely fiction writing that will push your writing career forward. So I don't want you to feel guilty when you didn't write that paragraph or you didn't hit your word count today. Also, I think there's something to be said for things where you're really doing a writing sprint and you're trying to get like your rough draft done and you're writing a lot more than you usually do. I think that that gets you really immersed in your book, but it's not sustainable. So if you're doing something like NaNoWriMo and you're just rocking and rolling, that's great, but you cannot sustain that sort of production every single day for the rest of your life. You will burn out. And that's the issue with so much of this advice is I think that it induces guilt and actually puts writers at a risk for burnout. And also this whole writing regularly thing puts too much focus on the fiction writing part of it and keeps perpetuating this myth that writing success is about how good your writing is. Now, how good your writing is fine. That's important in a way, but writing success is holistic. You need to be establishing your audience relationships. You need to be having your writer's platform. You need to be a business person in addition. So I would say take this writing every day with a grain of salt and say instead, move forward every day. But of course, you can also take a break or a vacation once in a while. That's not going to completely tank your writing career. Don't worry about that. Now, the next big piece of advice is read constantly, read widely, read various genres and styles, and, read also within your genre. And this is going to offer you diverse perspectives, is what the general consensus is on the people who say read widely. Now, I think it's crucial to read. I think many authors come to writing because they're voracious readers. However, this is another thing where you've got all these plates in the air, and if you're also reading widely on top of it, and you're forcing yourself to read even while you're writing, that might be too much time spent on this whole reading and writing thing. And you might be taking time away from your production. When you're just consuming, that's not helping you to be the kind of productive that you need to be to publish a book in a timely manner. Because here's the thing, we're not having a race. We're all on a different schedule. But it is the truth that it's much better to have several books than to have a single book that took you forever to write. Writing too slowly can make you lose courage, lose momentum, and lose opportunities to have more readers discover you because you have more books out there. So be sure that when you're reading, it's not taking away from the productive side of what you're doing. And also, I find that when you read a lot of things, it can actually lead you to have this self-doubt about your own style. And many writers that I know, when they're reading something, they get super influenced to write in that general tone or in that voice, and it bleeds into their writing. And also they'll look at all these different, ideas or twists or styles, and they'll start to compare it to their own. So I think that reading a lot is great when you're in, for example, the research mode of your book, or when you're taking a break and you're on vacation, or when you're, rewarding yourself because you finish your rough draft. Great, read a book or two. But I think that when you're in the thick of writing or even editing, I think that reading books as a reader, reading them like in a critical manner, like many of the writers that I coach, many of them, I tell them to do that, but not when you're in active writing mode. When I'm in active writing mode, I often try to stop reading, and oftentimes it starts organically that I notice that I haven't read a book in a couple weeks because I'm in the thick of it. And I think that's probably a really healthy thing. Now, you might find that that's not true in your case, but I think that if you find yourself reading less while you're in the thick of writing, don't feel guilty about it. The next piece of advice is edit super thoroughly. Revision's crucial. You need to refine your work over and over and over again. Good writing is rewriting. Editing's the most important step. Yes, editing is really important, but sometimes I feel that this advice is given in a way that makes you feel that you have to keep revising until things are perfect. Perfect doesn't exist. Again, sometimes good enough is definitely the way to go. I don't want you to have a bunch of typos or have a plot that's all over the place, but that's why you hire an editor or have beta readers. But I don't want you to be just self-editing until, your book is completely not resembling the thing that you started with. You might as well have written 3 books while you were doing that. So remember to try to be a little bit more objective about how much self-editing you can actually do and stay with the same book. Just don't waste too much time rewriting and rewriting when you're just writing something different, not necessarily something better. So having an outside eye on things, I think, is the best thing you can do. Somebody who's actually objective. And then remember that your editor is not God. They can give you their opinion and you can refuse that once in a while, but also remember that your reader is important. But speaking of that, there's another piece of advice that's a little bit harmful, which is know your audience and know who your target reader is and tailor your writing to their preferences and interests. Well, I think this is kind of limiting. I think it's important to know who your target reader is in terms of education and background and, what they like in general, but your audience can change. And also, at the end of the day, you want to be writing a story that is going to be interesting for you to write. And then thinking, okay, am I communicating this story right to my target reader? But you don't want to think to yourself, oh, I read an article saying that readers are reading this sort of romance. That's not what I write, but I'm now going to change what I'm writing to target that reader. That can be a little bit dangerous. All of this advice that says write to market and understand what people are reading and what they want, it's great to know that, but not if it is impacting your writing voice and making you less authentic to who you are. So I don't want you to say I'm writing just for myself, because that doesn't really get you success. But I also want to write like yourself and not just be pandering too much to your audience. So it is a fine balance. When you're seeking feedback, which is one of the other pieces of advice, that's really important to do. But sometimes writers think, oh my God, I need nonstop feedback and I need to address every single piece of criticism and I need to keep refining, because one person said they didn't like my book. It's, again, a balance of things. And sometimes, feedback is definitely important. But if you're not asking your target reader for feedback, and if you're just asking your neighbor or your mom, and they're saying something that feels like it doesn't really serve your purposes, you might want to be just taking it with a grain of salt. And now comes where you're going to say, why are you contradicting yourself? But that whole piece of advice that says develop a thick skin, I don't think you should develop a thick skin. I think you should be objective about the fact that, people are rejected as part of the process, that you should be persistent, you should keep refining things, and that critiques are going to happen. But a thick skin to me says that you just decide that, like, oh, this is part of the process, I'm just going to keep going without being sensitive to what's really going on. So I want you to remain sensitive enough to be like, do I need to change something? I'm not just going to keep barging ahead. That doesn't help anyone. I think that you do need to have this balance between not being completely self-loathing, but also not being this person who's like, I know that people get rejected, I'm just going to keep going, without trying to see if there's something that's going on. Many times when you get some feedback from a beta reader, they know what's wrong with your book, but they don't know how to fix it. It's kind of an interesting thing. I've noticed this a lot, and I know it's doesn't making any sense, but your book is your book. So if somebody tells you something's wrong with it, they're probably right. And if they tell you how to fix it, they're probably wrong. You can figure out how to fix your book, but definitely don't just be that thick-skinned person who's like, oh, they're wrong about the fact that there's something wrong with it. You need to have that balance as well. The next series or category of advice is all of that advice about the writing craft. They talk about, looking at what authors do, other authors do. They look about, mastering the dialogue and creating these vivid settings and writing in this poetic manner, developing strong characters. All of that is great. It's great to improve your writing craft and definitely try to hone in on that. But I feel that so many writers don't fail because they don't have a good turn of phrase. They don't fail because they don't know how to write a good descriptive passage. On the contrary, I see so many writers who have great writing skills on the paragraph level, but then they don't manage to funnel that into a story. So I would say that before you start looking at the nitty gritty of what makes your sentences tick and what makes your writing poetic and beautiful and award worthy, look at whether you're writing a good story. I think that's so important. And then at that point, once you have a great story down, then you can worry about making it pretty. But I think that story first, voice second. I think your unique voice, something that's distinctively you, is super important. Poetry last. Unless your voice is about poetry, but then that's a whole different thing. I think that poetry often comes at the cost of the story itself and clarity and understanding what's going on. Finally, the piece of advice that I want people to take with a grain of salt is attend writing conferences. This is a piece of advice that so many people will give you, especially agents and editors and publishers, because guess who participates in the conferences? They do. So, does attending a writing conference inspire you and help you? It might, but too many writers will spend their hard earned money going to a writing conference. They're going to spend all this time. They're going to take, they're going to spend all this money and they're going to go to the conference and they're going to assume that I'm going to go to this conference and I'm going to get a literary agent because I'm going to network. This networking advice is a little bit confusing for writers because here's the thing. You could network until the cows come home. But if your book isn't something that a publisher thinks they can sell, you're not going to get an agent just because you went to the writing conference. Many times going to a writing conference is kind of a waste of time unless you're going to just kind of get motivated and get yourself into the mood to be productive. But I think that too many authors think that attending this writing conference is going to be the magic bullet that's going to make them finally be, successful just because they paid the money to do this. That is not always accurate. And also, when it comes to networking with other writers, which is another big piece of advice that people are given, I've seen where networking too much with other writers and starting to put these obligations on yourself to be in a critique group, be in a writing group, be, workshopping people's work and, editing their work and commenting on their work, you end up putting so much time and energy into helping other writers. And that's lovely to have that community. Writing can be very lonely, but I think you don't want to be wasting your time too much or giving too much of your energy to energy vampires, for example, or to things that aren't really going to be yielding the success that you're looking for. So if you're looking for community and you're looking for, something like that, I think that kind of communicating with your ideal reader is a great way to do it via building an author platform. Because one of the things that I see too little when I'm looking at the writing advice is build an author platform. So important. So many authors come to me and they've written their whole book and they haven't started building their author platform yet. They don't have a website. They don't have a mailing list. They barely have a social media presence. And that seems to me like it is the biggest missed opportunity, because whether you want to publish conventionally or self-publish, having an author platform is crucial. Many publishers and agents look to see what your footprint is on social media, what your audience is, how many people you have on your mailing list. All of this tells them what kind of a business person you are, and also tells them what their options are when they're going to be marketing you. If it's easier to market an author, it's more compelling to have them signed on to publish their book because you can sell more copies. It is business after all. And if you're going to be self-publishing, well, it's obvious that having a mailing list is going to help you to announce that your book is being published. It's going to help you to find beta readers. It's going to help you to find people to review your book. It is not easy to do those things. And when you're trying to sell a book, it is nonstop work. So you cannot underestimate the value of your author platform. So the sooner you start building it, the better. That would almost be the number one piece of advice from me. But let's talk about my kind of general but pretty inspiring advice, I think. The biggest lessons that I've learned along the way and that I now share with my writers, whether it's in my one-on-one coaching or whether it's in my course From Idea to Published in 6 Months, or whether it's in workbooks like DIY Author, I really try to share these lessons that I've learned. And making mistakes with not going along with these lessons really set me back a lot. And I want to see you move forward faster. So biggest mistake ever is thinking it's just about the writing, the craft of writing. And it's not about mindset and the business. That is key. Never ignore the fact that writing may be an art, but it's also a business. Don't leave your author platform for last. If there's only one thing I were to tell you in this episode, it would be that. Stop worrying too much about good writing or what about somebody else calls good writing or about what that other author is writing and, how poetic it is. Don't worry about that. Worry about good storytelling. Worry about communicating with your reader. Don't worry about sticking to a set schedule and a writing desk that's always the same thing. That is not always realistic for writers. Many of you know that I do dictation in my car, or I'll go to a coffee shop and then change coffee shops, or maybe I'll have a different schedule as I go around. So never feel guilty that you're not like Hemingway at your writing desk at a certain time, always in the same place, sitting there in Key West. That's not realistic for all of us. And especially with technology being the way it is, we have a million different ways of writing and telling our stories and sharing our stories. So if it doesn't look like what you thought it would look like, that's not a big deal. There's so many ways to get our writing out there and to get our writing done. My next piece of advice is never think that it's not artistic if you plan. Planning is so important, whether you're planning your plot or you're planning how you're going to market your book, or you're planning, how you're going to go about this and what happens next. Planning helps, and break those little plans into different manageable little bits, and you're going to be hitting those goals in no time. Don't try to go it alone, but also don't let everybody be an energy vampire or be destructive of your writing. So be really careful about how you give your energy and who you give your energy to. Don't be solitary all the time, but also don't be embarrassed when you have to be solitary, because writing is a solitary thing. Don't believe everything you hear from people who don't know anything about publishing, or even from some people who seem to be publishing professionals. Have a little bit of a discerning ear when you hear them saying things that are pronouncements. Many times they're saying that because they have a horse in that race, or they have a reason for saying what they just said. A friend of mine had just gone to a writer's conference, and a publisher was telling her that, oh, if you self-publish, no publisher will ever want you, et cetera, et cetera. Well, they're saying that because of where they work. That's not really a truth. So don't believe everything you hear about publishing, even from some of those publishing professionals. Try to feel out what feels true to you, and then experience will tell you the rest. And also know that things in the publishing industry are changing all the time, that exceptions happen, and that, sometimes you can be the exception that proves the rule. Who knows? And finally, never let others define what success is for you. Never let someone make you feel bad because, their brothers, neighbors, girlfriends, whatever, was super successful and you're not as successful in that exact way. Success is success. When you have a win, I want you to celebrate it, because if you're moving forward and you keep moving forward, amazing things are going to happen. And finally, I really want you to not be self-destructive, and I want you to strive to have balance in your life. Never ignore self-care. Never ignore your mindset, your physical and mental well-being. All of those things are crucial, because burnout is a thing, and avoiding burnout is definitely crucial. That's it. I hope this episode really helped you to kind of take pieces of advice with a grain of salt, and also start thinking about what works for you and what really actually makes the difference and moves the needle when it comes to moving your career forward and hitting your writing goals. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to being with you next time on the How to Be an Author podcast. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. You can go on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com, or onlineCoursesForWriters.com. Send me an email, or you can check out one of my courses or one of my workbooks. I would love to see you hit your writing goals this year. If you have any pressing writing-related questions or would like to be featured on the How to Be an Author podcast, please feel free to reach out on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com.